The spaceship drifted silently through the void, its engines humming softly as it approached the barren planet. The crew had been sent on a routine mission to survey uncharted territories, but what they found would change everything. "Captain, you need to see this," the young scientist said, his voice trembling with excitement. He stood in front of a strange, glowing artifact buried in the planet's rocky surface. The artifact was unlike anything they had ever seen, smooth, metallic, and covered in intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. The captain, a seasoned explorer with decades of experience, frowned as he examined the artifact. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cautious. "I don't know," the young scientist admitted. "But look at this." He pointed to a series of symbols etched into the surface. "This language, it's ancient." And here, he traced his finger over a specific symbol. "This says, humans." The crew fell silent. Humans. The word hung in the air like a ghost. To them, humans were nothing more than a myth, a story told by elders to inspire or frighten. No one had ever seen a human, and most believed they had never existed. "You're saying humans were here?" the captain asked, his voice skeptical. "I'm saying this artifact proves it," the young scientist replied. Humans were real. And if they were here, who knows what else they left behind? The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of humans, being so advanced they were almost mythical, was hard to grasp. But the evidence was right in front of them, glowing faintly in the dim light of the planet's sun. "Let's take it back to the ship," the captain said finally. "We'll analyze it further. But keep this quiet for now. I don't want anyone jumping to conclusions." As they carefully extracted the artifact and carried it back to the ship, the young scientist couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. He had spent his life studying ancient civilizations, and this discovery was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Back on the ship, the crew gathered around the artifact as the young scientist began his analysis. The symbols glowed brighter as he worked, and suddenly, the artifact came to life. A holographic map projected into the air, showing a star system with a single planet highlighted. "What is that?" the captain asked, his voice tense. The young scientist's eyes widened as he recognized the planet. "It's Earth," he said quietly. "The map is pointing to Earth." The crew stared at the hologram in stunned silence. Earth was a name they all knew, but no one had ever seen it. It was said to be a dead planet, uninhabitable and forgotten. But if the artifact was pointing them there, it could only mean one thing: humans had left something behind. "We have to go," the young scientist said, his voice filled with determination. This could be the most important discovery in history. The captain hesitated, his mind racing. The journey to Earth would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee they would find anything. But the artifact's message was clear: humans were real, and they had left a legacy waiting to be uncovered. "Set a course for Earth," the captain said finally. "We're going to find out the truth." As the ship's engines roared to life and the crew prepared for the journey, the young scientist couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. For the first time in his life, he was about to uncover the secrets of a civilization that had been lost to time. And he knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The ship hurtled through hyperspace, its engines humming steadily as the crew prepared for the long journey to Earth. The artifact, now secured in the ship's main lab, continued to glow faintly, its symbols shifting and changing as if alive. The young scientist spent every waking moment studying it, determined to unlock its secrets. The captain, however, was less enthusiastic. He sat in the command chair, staring at the star-filled viewscreen, his mind heavy with doubt. "Are we making a mistake?" he asked aloud, more to himself than anyone else. The young scientist looked up from his work. "What do you mean?" he asked. The captain sighed. "Earth is a dead planet. Even if humans were real, what could possibly be left after all this time? We're risking everything for a myth. It's not a myth, the young scientist said firmly. The artifact proves that. Humans were real, and they left something behind. Something important. Don't you feel it? This is bigger than all of us. The captain didn't respond. He had spent his life exploring the galaxy, but this mission felt different. It wasn't just about discovery anymore, it was about uncovering a truth that could change everything they knew. As the days passed, the crew grew restless. The journey to Earth would take weeks, and the tension on the ship was palpable. To pass the time, the young scientist began sharing stories he had heard about humans. My grandfather used to tell me about them, he said one evening, as the crew gathered in the mess hall. He said they were unlike any other species. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They built cities that touched the stars and created technology that seemed like magic. But most importantly, they cared. They cared about each other, about their planet, about the future. That's why they sacrificed themselves. To give us a chance. The crew listened in silence, their skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. Even the captain found himself drawn in by the stories. If they were so great, he asked, why did they disappear? The young scientist hesitated. No one knows for sure. Some say it was a war. Others say it was a natural disaster. But my grandfather believed they chose to leave. They saw what was coming and decided to give the galaxy a fresh start. The room fell silent as the crew absorbed the story. For the first time, the idea of humans felt real to them, not just a myth, but a lost civilization with a legacy worth uncovering. As the ship neared Earth, the artifact began to behave strangely. Its glow intensified, and the symbols shifted faster, as if reacting to their proximity to the planet. The young scientist worked tirelessly to decipher the new messages, but they were unlike anything he had seen before. "Captain, you need to see this," he said one day, his voice urgent. "The artifact is showing coordinates, specific locations on Earth. It's like it's guiding us." The captain studied the coordinates, his expression grim. "If this is some kind of trap, we're walking right into it." "It's not a trap," the young scientist insisted. "It's a map. A map to whatever the humans left behind." The captain hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. Finally, he nodded. "Prepare the landing team. We'll follow the coordinates and see where they lead. But stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." As the ship entered Earth's orbit, the crew gathered in the landing bay, their nerves on edge. The planet below was a desolate wasteland, its surface scarred by time and decay. But somewhere beneath the ruins lay the answers they had been searching for. The young scientist stood at the front of the group, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to uncover the truth about humans and their legacy. As the landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere, the artifact suddenly emitted a loud, piercing sound. The young scientist looked down at it, his eyes widening in shock. The symbols had changed again, forming a single, ominous message: "The truth will test you." The crew stepped out of the landing craft and into the desolate landscape of Earth. The air was thin and cold, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked and dry. In the distance, the massive structure loomed like a giant, its edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and sand. The young scientist led the way, the artifact clutched tightly in his hands. Its glow had grown brighter as they approached the structure, and the symbols on its surface shifted constantly, as if guiding them forward. "This way," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The crew followed in silence, their eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of danger. As they drew closer to the structure, they began to see signs of human civilization: broken buildings, rusted vehicles, and fragments of technology scattered across the ground. The young scientist paused to examine a piece of metal, his fingers tracing the intricate designs etched into its surface. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The craftsmanship, it's beyond anything we've ever seen. Humans weren't just advanced, they were artists." The captain frowned. If they were so advanced, why did they disappear? What could have destroyed a civilization like this? The young scientist shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it was, it must have been catastrophic." As they reached the entrance to the structure, the artifact suddenly emitted a loud, high-pitched sound. The crew froze, their eyes darting around for the source of the noise. But there was nothing, just the ruins and the silence of a dead world. The young scientist held up the artifact, his hands trembling. "It's reacting to something inside," he said. "We need to go in." The captain hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to turn back. But the curiosity in the young scientist's eyes was impossible to ignore. "Stay close," he said finally. "And be ready for anything." The interior of the structure was dark and cold, the air thick with dust. The crew's flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in strange symbols and images. The young scientist studied them closely, his excitement growing with every step. "These are records," he said, his voice echoing in the empty halls. "Stories, histories, knowledge, everything the humans wanted to preserve. This isn't just a building, it's a library. A time capsule." The crew moved deeper into the structure, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they turned a corner, they found themselves in a large chamber filled with strange devices and machines. The young scientist's eyes widened as he recognized some of them. "This is technology," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Advanced technology. Far beyond anything we have. Look at this," he pointed to a machine with a smooth, glass-like surface. "This could be a power source. Or a communication device. I'm not even sure." The captain frowned. If humans had all this, why didn't they use it to save themselves? The young scientist didn't answer. He was too busy examining a small, handheld device he had found on a nearby table. As he touched it, the device lit up, projecting a holographic image into the air. The crew gathered around, their eyes wide with amazement. The image showed a human, a tall, slender figure with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The figure began to speak, its voice soft and melodic, but the language was unfamiliar. The young scientist quickly activated the artifact, which began translating the words. "We are the last of humanity," the figure said. "Our time has come to an end, but we leave behind a gift, a legacy for those who come after us. Use it wisely. Protect it. And remember us." The hologram faded, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The young scientist looked down at the device in his hands, his mind racing. "This is it," he said. "This is what they left behind. A gift. A legacy." The captain shook his head. "A gift? What kind of gift? And why leave it here, on a dead planet?" The young scientist didn't answer. He was already moving deeper into the chamber, his eyes fixed on a large, circular door at the far end. The artifact's glow intensified as he approached, and the symbols on its surface shifted rapidly. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with determination. "The final gift. It's behind this door." The crew gathered around the door, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The young scientist placed his hand on the surface, and the door began to open with a loud, grinding sound. As the dust cleared, they found themselves staring into a massive chamber filled with light. In the center of the chamber was a single, glowing object, a device unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed with energy, its surface covered in intricate patterns and symbols. The young scientist stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. "This is it," he said. "The final gift. The legacy of humanity." The ground shook violently as the chamber filled with blinding light. The crew shielded their eyes, their hearts pounding as the walls around them groaned and shifted. For a moment, it felt as though the entire structure might collapse. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. The light dimmed, and the crew cautiously lowered their hands, their eyes adjusting to the new surroundings. They were no longer in the chamber, they were standing in a vast, underground city. The city was unlike anything they had ever seen. Towering buildings of glass and metal stretched as far as the eye could see, their surfaces gleaming in the soft, artificial light. Lush greenery filled the spaces between the buildings, and streams of clear water flowed through the streets. It was a paradise, preserved perfectly beneath the ruins of Earth. The young scientist stared in awe, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This is impossible," he whispered. "How could something like this exist? How could it survive all this time?" The captain stepped forward, his eyes scanning the city for any sign of danger. "Stay alert," he said. "We don't know what's down here." The crew moved cautiously through the streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was fresh and clean, a stark contrast to the desolate surface above. As they walked, they began to notice details, signs of life frozen in time. A child's toy lying on the ground. A table set for a meal. A book left open on a bench. "It's like they just disappeared," one of the crew members said, her voice trembling. "Like they vanished in an instant." The young scientist shook his head. "No. They didn't vanish. They left. They built this place to preserve their legacy, and then they moved on." The captain frowned. "Moved on? To where?" The young scientist didn't answer. He was too busy examining a holographic display that had activated as they passed. The display showed images of humans, smiling, laughing, living their lives. It was a glimpse into a world that had been lost, a world that had once been full of hope and joy. As they continued through the city, they came across a large, central plaza. In the center of the plaza stood a massive statue, a figure with its arms outstretched, as if offering something to the sky. At the base of the statue was a plaque, covered in symbols. The young scientist knelt down to examine the plaque, his hands trembling as he translated the words. "To those who come after us," he read aloud. "We leave behind this city as a testament to what we were. Use it wisely. Protect it. And remember us." The crew stood in silence, their hearts heavy with emotion. For the first time, they truly understood the magnitude of what they had discovered. This wasn't just a city, it was a message. A message from a civilization that had cared deeply about the future, even as their own came to an end. The young scientist looked up at the statue, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to find out what happened to them," he said. "We have to understand why they left this behind." The captain nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need to find out what that device does. If it's part of their legacy, it could be the key to everything." As they turned to leave the plaza, the ground beneath them began to shake again. This time, it wasn't just a tremor, it was a deep, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from the very heart of the city. The crew stumbled, their eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" one of the crew members shouted. The young scientist looked down at the artifact in his hands. Its glow had intensified, and the symbols on its surface were shifting rapidly. "It's reacting to something," he said. "Something big." Before anyone could respond, a loud, mechanical sound filled the air. The crew turned to see a massive door opening in the side of one of the buildings. From the darkness beyond, a figure emerged, a humanoid robot, its eyes glowing with a soft, blue light. The robot stopped in front of the crew, its head tilting as it studied them. Then, in a voice that was both mechanical and strangely human, it spoke. "Welcome," it said. "You have found the hidden city. The legacy of humanity awaits." The crew followed the robot through the open door and into a long, dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with strange symbols and glowing panels, and the air was filled with a faint hum, as if the entire building was alive. The robot led them to a large, circular room with a high ceiling and a single, glowing pedestal in the center. On the pedestal was a small, crystal-like object, pulsing with a soft, golden light. "This is the first test," the robot said, its voice calm and steady. "To prove your worth, you must demonstrate courage, intelligence, and empathy. Only then will you be granted access to humanity's final gift." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The captain stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the crystal. "What do we need to do?" he asked. The robot gestured to the crystal. "Place your hand on the object. The test will begin." The young scientist hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'll go first," he said. He placed his hand on the crystal, and the room suddenly filled with light. The walls disappeared, replaced by a vast, open landscape. The crew found themselves standing on a rocky cliff, with a deep chasm stretching out before them. A narrow, crumbling bridge spanned the chasm, and on the other side was a glowing door. The robot's voice echoed in the air. "To pass this test, you must cross the bridge. But be warned, the bridge will not hold all of you. Choose wisely." The crew stared at the bridge, their hearts pounding. The young scientist took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'll go," he said. "I'm the lightest. I have the best chance." The captain shook his head. "No. It's too dangerous. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," the robot said. "You must decide." The crew argued for a moment, but time was running out. The bridge was already beginning to crumble. Finally, the young scientist made up his mind. "I'm going," he said firmly. "Trust me." He stepped onto the bridge, his heart racing as the stones shifted beneath his feet. The crew watched in silence, their breaths held as he carefully made his way across. Halfway over, the bridge began to collapse, and the young scientist had to leap the final distance, landing hard on the other side. The door opened, and the crew found themselves back in the circular room. The young scientist was breathing heavily, but he was unharmed. The robot nodded approvingly. "Courage has been demonstrated. The next test will begin." The room shifted again, and the crew found themselves in a dark, maze-like structure. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was filled with a low, ominous hum. "This is a test of intelligence," the robot said. "To pass, you must solve the puzzle and find the exit. But be warned, the maze is designed to confuse and disorient. Only those who think clearly will succeed." The crew split up, each taking a different path. The young scientist focused on the symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. After several wrong turns and dead ends, he finally noticed a pattern, a sequence of symbols that seemed to repeat. He followed the sequence, and the walls began to shift, opening a path to the exit. The crew regrouped, their confidence growing as they moved on to the final test. The room changed once more, and the crew found themselves in a small, dimly lit chamber. In the center of the chamber was a young child, crying softly. The robot's voice filled the air. "This is a test of empathy. To pass, you must comfort the child and ease their pain." The crew hesitated, unsure of what to do. The young scientist stepped forward, kneeling in front of the child. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're here to help." The child looked up, their eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," they whispered. The young scientist smiled gently. "I know. But you're not alone. We're here with you." The child's tears began to dry, and a small smile appeared on their face. The room filled with light, and the crew found themselves back in the circular room. The robot nodded. "Empathy has been demonstrated. You have proven your worth." The pedestal in the center of the room began to glow brighter, and the crystal-like object rose into the air. The robot gestured to it. This is the key to humanity's final gift. Take it, and use it wisely. The young scientist reached out and took the crystal, his heart filled with a mix of awe and determination. But before he could say anything, the ground beneath them began to shake again. The walls of the room started to collapse, and the robot's voice echoed urgently. Leave now. The city is unstable. You must go. The crew stood on the surface of Earth, the crystal clutched tightly in the young scientist's hands. The ground beneath them was still trembling, and the ruins of the hidden city were now completely buried. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. The captain turned to the young scientist, his expression grim. What now? He asked. We have the crystal, but what does it do? What is this final gift? The young scientist stared at the crystal, its golden light pulsing softly. I don't know, he admitted. But the robot said it's the key to humanity's final gift. We need to figure out how to use it. The crew returned to the landing craft, their minds racing with questions. As they lifted off and headed back to the ship, the young scientist began examining the crystal more closely. It was warm to the touch, and the symbols on its surface seemed to shift and change as he held it. When they reached the ship, the young scientist immediately went to the lab, determined to unlock the crystal's secrets. The rest of the crew gathered around, their eyes fixed on the glowing object. After hours of analysis, the young scientist finally made a breakthrough. I think I've figured it out, he said, his voice filled with excitement. The crystal is a control device. It's connected to something powerful. If I activate it, we might be able to see what it does. The captain frowned. Activate it? Are you sure that's a good idea? We don't know what we're dealing with here. The young scientist hesitated, then nodded. We have to know. This is what we came for. This is the legacy of humanity. With the crew watching nervously, the young scientist placed the crystal into a specially designed slot in the lab's console. The moment it clicked into place, the ship's systems came to life. Lights flickered, screens lit up, and a low hum filled the air. Then, a holographic image appeared in the center of the room. It was a map of the galaxy, with a single star system highlighted. The young scientist recognized it immediately. It was their home planet. What is this? The captain asked, his voice tense. The young scientist's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. It's a device, he said. A device capable of restoring life to dead planets. This is humanity's final gift, a way to heal the galaxy. The crew stared at the hologram in stunned silence. The implications were overwhelming. If the device worked, it could bring life back to their dying planet. It could change everything. But the young scientist's excitement was tempered by a growing sense of unease. There's something else, he said, his voice quiet. The device, it requires a massive amount of energy to activate. More than we have. More than our planet has. The captain frowned. What are you saying? The young scientist looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and fear. To activate the device, we'd have to sacrifice something. Something big. Maybe even, our ship. The room fell silent as the crew absorbed the weight of his words. The device was a miracle, but it came at a cost. A cost they weren't sure they were willing to pay. The captain shook his head. We can't do this. Not without knowing more. We need to think this through. The young scientist nodded, but his mind was already racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was what they were meant to do, that this was the purpose of their journey. But the risk was enormous, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. As the crew debated their next move, the ship's systems suddenly began to activate on their own. The holographic map shifted, and a new set of symbols appeared. The young scientist translated them quickly, his heart pounding. The device is activating, he said, his voice filled with urgency. "It's targeting our home planet. We don't have much time." The ship's systems were in chaos. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the holographic map in the lab showed their home planet glowing brighter and brighter. The device was activating, and there was no way to stop it. The captain barked orders, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get us moving. Set a course for home, now." The crew scrambled to their stations, their hands flying over controls as the ship's engines roared to life. The young scientist stayed in the lab, his eyes fixed on the hologram. The device's energy readings were off the charts, and he knew they were running out of time. "We're not going to make it," he said, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "The device is too powerful. It's going to activate before we get there." The captain stormed into the lab, his face set in a grim mask. "Then we'll have to find another way. Can we shut it down? Disconnect the crystal?" The young scientist shook his head. "The crystal is the key. If we remove it, the device might go critical. It could destroy everything." The captain cursed under his breath. "Then what do we do? We can't just let it activate. We don't even know what it'll do." The young scientist hesitated, then looked up at the captain, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to trust it. This is humanity's final gift. They wouldn't have left it behind if it wasn't meant to help us." The captain stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But if this goes wrong, it's on you." The ship hurtled through space, its engines pushed to the limit. The crew worked tirelessly, monitoring the device's progress and preparing for the worst. As they neared their home planet, the tension on the ship was palpable. The young scientist stayed in the lab, watching the hologram as the device's energy levels continued to rise. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The humans had left this device behind for a reason, but what was it? As the ship entered orbit around their home planet, the device suddenly emitted a loud, piercing sound. The hologram shifted, showing a countdown. The young scientist's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "It's not just restoring life," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's terraforming the planet. It's creating a new ecosystem. But, it needs a catalyst. Something to start the process." The captain frowned. "A catalyst? What kind of catalyst?" The young scientist looked down at the crystal in his hands. "This. The crystal is the catalyst. But once it's used, it'll be gone. We'll lose the key to the device." The captain's eyes narrowed. "And if we don't use it? What happens then?" The young scientist hesitated. "The device will still activate, but it won't work properly. It could destabilize the planet. Make things worse." The crew fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The captain looked around at his crew, his expression grim. "We don't have a choice. We have to use the crystal." The young scientist nodded, his hands trembling as he placed the crystal into a slot on the console. The moment it clicked into place, the ship shook violently, and the hologram showed the device's energy level spiking. The countdown reached 0, and the device activated. The ship's lights flickered, and the hum of the engines grew weaker as the device continued to drain its power. The crew watched in awe as their home planet transformed before their eyes, barren wastelands turning into lush forests, polluted skies clearing to reveal vibrant blue. But the miracle came at a cost. The young scientist frantically worked at the console, trying to stabilize the ship's systems. "We're losing power fast," he said, his voice tense. "If this keeps up, we won't have enough energy to land, or even to stay in orbit." The captain clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Can we disconnect the device? Stop it from draining our power?" The young scientist shook his head. "If we disconnect it now, the terraforming process will stop. The planet will be left half-finished. It could destabilize the entire ecosystem. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The stakes were clear: they could save themselves and risk ruining the planet's transformation, or they could let the device complete its work and risk losing the ship, and possibly their lives. The captain turned to the crew, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to decide. Now. Do we cut the power and save ourselves, or do we let the device finish its job?" The room fell silent as the weight of the decision settled over them. The young scientist spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "We can't stop it. This is what we came for. This is humanity's gift, a chance to heal our planet. If we give up now, everything we've done will be for nothing." One of the crew members, a seasoned engineer, shook his head. "But if we lose the ship, we're stranded. We'll never make it back home. Is it worth the risk?" The captain looked around at his crew, his eyes filled with determination. "We didn't come this far to turn back now. We've faced impossible odds before, and we've always found a way. This is no different." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. They had come too far to give up. The captain turned to the young scientist. "Do whatever you can to keep the ship running. We'll find a way to survive this." The young scientist nodded and returned to the console, his hands flying over the controls. He rerouted power from non-essential systems, trying to buy them more time. But the device's energy demands were too great, and the ship's power levels continued to drop. As the ship's systems began to fail, the crew worked together to keep it functional. The engineer managed to stabilize the engines, while another crew member monitored the life support systems. But it was a losing battle. The young scientist watched the hologram as the device's terraforming process neared completion. The planet was almost unrecognizable, a vibrant, thriving world filled with life. But the ship was on the brink of collapse. "We're not going to make it," the young scientist said, his voice filled with despair. "The ship's power is almost gone." The captain placed a hand on his shoulder. "We knew this might happen. But look at what we've accomplished. Our planet has a future because of us. That's worth any sacrifice." The crew gathered in the control room, their eyes fixed on the hologram as the device completed its work. The planet was transformed, a paradise reborn. But as the device powered down, the ship's systems failed completely. The lights went out, and the ship drifted silently in orbit. The crew sat in the darkness, their hearts heavy but filled with a strange sense of peace. They had done what they came to do. The ship's backup power flickered to life, casting a dim glow over the control room. The crew sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the hologram as the device's signal pulsed steadily into the void of space. The young scientist leaned closer, his heart racing as he tried to decipher the signal. "What is it?" the captain asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The young scientist shook his head, his hands trembling as he worked. "I don't know. It's not just a signal, it's a message. A call. But I can't tell where it's going or what it's saying." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The device had already done the impossible, transforming their dying planet into a thriving world. What more could it be doing? As the young scientist continued to analyze the signal, the ship's communication system suddenly crackled to life. A voice filled the room, calm and steady, speaking in a language none of them recognized. But the artifact, still glowing faintly on the console, began translating the words. "To those who have unlocked our final gift," the voice said, "we thank you. You have proven yourselves worthy, not only of our legacy but of the future we hope to create. The device you activated was not just for your planet, it was a beacon. A call to others like you, across the galaxy, who seek to heal and rebuild." The crew listened in stunned silence as the voice continued. "We, the last of humanity, left this gift behind not just for you, but for all who come after. The galaxy is vast, and its wounds are deep. But with courage, intelligence, and empathy, you can heal them. You can build a future worthy of the sacrifices made by those who came before. The young scientist's eyes filled with tears as the message ended. He looked around at the crew, his voice choked with emotion. This was never just about us. It was about everyone. Humanity didn't just leave us a gift, they left us a responsibility. The captain nodded, his expression solemn. Then we'd better get to work. We have a lot to do. Over the following days, the crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship and establish contact with their home planet. The transformation was complete, the air was clean, the water pure, and the land fertile. But the real work was just beginning. As they prepared to return to the surface, the young scientist took one last look at the artifact. Its glow had faded, but its message remained clear. Humanity's legacy wasn't just about technology or terraforming, it was about hope. Hope for a better future, and the belief that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. The crew landed on the planet's surface, stepping out into a world reborn. The sky was a brilliant blue, the air filled with the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers. It was a new beginning, not just for their planet, but for them. As they stood together, looking out over the horizon, the young scientist spoke softly. We've been given a second chance. But it's not just for us. It's for everyone. We have to honor humanity's legacy by building a future worth fighting for. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder. We will. Together. Final lesson. The story ends with the crew vowing to honor humanity's legacy by spreading hope and healing across the galaxy. The final message is clear: the future is not just about survival, it's about building something worth leaving behind. Humanity's greatest gift was not their technology, but their belief in a better tomorrow. And now, it was up to the crew, and others like them, to carry that belief forward.